children. The frost on the Montana grasslands that November of 1889 did not come gently. It came like a verdict. Lena Marsh had been riding for 3 days when her horse finally gave out beneath her, children. Stumbling sideways into a creek bed choked with ice and dead cattails, she went down with him, one boot catching in the stirrup, children. Her shoulder hitting the frozen ground so hard she felt the impact in her back teeth. The horse scrambled up and bolted. She did not, children. For a long moment she simply lay there in the shallow freezing water, staring up at a sky the color of old pewter, listening to the silence of a land that did not care whether she lived or died, children. The leather satchel strapped across her chest was still there. She pressed one hand to it instinctively, even before she pressed her hand to her own face to check if she was bleeding. She was, children. A thin cut above her left eyebrow where a rock had kissed her on the way down, children. She did not know how long she lay there before she heard the creak of wagon wheels. The man who found her was not riding, children. He was walking beside a wide-bodied draft horse, pulling a flat timber wagon loaded with split pine. He came around the bend of the creek trail, saw her, and stopped. He did not call out, children. He simply stood and looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has not yet decided to solve. She looked back at him from the mud, children. He was older than she first expected, somewhere past 40, with a jaw that looked like it had been hewn from the same material as the mountains behind him, children. He wore a canvas coat the color of dried tobacco and a hat that had been rained on too many times to hold its original shape. His eyes, when he finally stepped closer, were a deep, unremarkable brown, children, the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. "You alive?" he said. "Not entirely," Lena said, children. He pulled her out of the creek bed the way a man pulls a fence post. With 2 hands, no ceremony, and a complete absence of apology for the discomfort involved. He set her on her feet, children, and when her legs refused to hold her, he caught her without comment and helped her to the side of the wagon. His name was Cord Haverfield, children. He told her this the same way he told her his horse's name was Frank, and that his homestead was 2 miles north. Plain information, offered without warmth or hostility, children. He wrapped a horse blanket around her shoulders and told her she was going to lose the feeling in her feet if she didn't get by a fire inside the hour. Lena did not argue. She was in no condition to argue, children. She could feel the cold working its way inward now, past her wet clothing and into the marrow of her, children. And she knew from watching her younger brother nearly freeze to death in a collapsed irrigation ditch 2 winters ago that this was the point where the body began making decisions on its own, children. The homestead was a low, solid cabin built from timber and river stone, with a sod roof that had turned the gray-green of old moss. There was a barn behind it, a root cellar, a windbreak of cottonwood on the northern side. It was the home of a man who had built carefully and alone and intended to stay. Everything about it said permanence. Everything about it said keep out, children. He helped her inside without being asked to, which she took as a sign that whatever else he was not a man who needed to perform helpfulness. He simply was or he wasn't, and in this case he was, children. He got the cast iron stove going with a speed that told her he'd done it 10,000 times in the dark, and he put a tin pot of water on before he'd even fully straightened up. "Get those boots off," he said, children, without turning around, children. Lena sat in the only chair the cabin offered, a wide-backed thing made from bent willow branches, and began working at her bootlaces with fingers that barely responded, children. The satchel across her chest shifted as she leaned forward, and she caught it with her forearm and held it there instinctively, pressing it flat against her body. Cord turned from the stove then, children. He looked at her arm pressed across her chest. He looked at her face. He said nothing. "I can manage," Lena said, children. "Nobody said you couldn't." He handed her a dry wool sock and a towel without another word and went back to the stove. She got the boots off. She got the socks off after them, children, and the sight of her own feet, white and bloodless as candle wax, was alarming enough that she allowed herself one small private moment of fear before she put it away and focused on rubbing the feeling back in, children. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine resin and something else underneath, something like old paper, children. Books maybe, or letters. Something that had been read many times and put away. She was almost warm, almost, when Cord turned and saw that she was still wearing the canvas coat, children. Still wearing the satchel beneath it. He looked at her with the studied patience of a man who had learned that rushing things was how you got hurt. That coat's soaked through, he said. I know, children. You'll stay cold, I know that too. He studied her for a moment, children. She met his gaze and held it, which cost her something. She was exhausted down to the architecture of her bones. Holding anyone's gaze felt like an act of tremendous will. I don't want it off, she said, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. She hadn't meant to say it that plainly, children. She'd had a whole sequence of deflections prepared. She was fine. She was warming up. She'd handle it herself. But something about the plainness of this man, the complete absence of performance in him, children, had stripped her own performance away without her noticing. He looked at her steadily. I'm not in the habit of robbing injured women in my own house. I know. It's not about you. Then what's it about, children? She looked at the stove, children. The iron had begun to tick and expand with the heat, a small rhythmic sound like a patient heartbeat. If you see what I'm carrying, she said carefully, you'll be in danger. I mean that literally, not as a figure of speech. Cord set down the tin cup he'd been holding. He pulled the second chair, a rougher thing, a stool really, out from under the table and sat down across from her, children. He laced his fingers together and leaned forward on his elbows, not with urgency but with the gravity of a man who has decided to pay full attention. You rode 3 days to get here, he said. Yes. From where? Billings. Something shifted in his face, just slightly. In November, yes, alone. My brother was going to come with me. He couldn't, he repeated. She said nothing, children. The fire popped loudly in the stove, and outside the wind made a sound against the sod roof like a long, slow breath. Cord Haverfield stood up. He went to the stove and poured 2 cups of something from the tin pot. Not coffee, some kind of grain broth, and set one on the table in front of her. Then he said, I'm going to check the barn. Frank needs seeing to, children. When I come back, you can decide if you want to tell me what you're carrying. He put on his coat and his ruined hat and went out into the cold as if this were the most natural thing in the world, as if giving a stranger privacy to make up her mind was just part of common decency. Lena sat alone in the warmth of his house. She put both hands around the cup. The heat was extraordinary against her palms, children. She looked down at the satchel, still strapped across her chest, and for a moment she simply breathed. Then she reached beneath the canvas coat and unbuckled the strap, children. What she drew out was a leather envelope, the kind a solicitor might use, stiff and dark with age. It was tied shut with a length of black cord wound several times around a bone button, children. She set it on her knee and looked at it. Inside that envelope was a deed of transfer for 1,100 acres of Gallatin Valley land, children. Her father's land, legally recorded, witnessed, and filed in Billings 3 weeks before he died. Land that her father-in-law, Denton Aldridge, had since claimed was obtained through fraud. Land that he had filed a counterclaim upon, producing papers that Lena knew, that she knew in her blood and in her sleep, were forgeries, children. And at the bottom of the envelope, pressed flat between the deed pages, children, was a small square of paper that her father had folded 4 times before he pressed it into her hands, on the last morning she ever saw him alive. He had told her to find the land agent in Helena. Children. A man named Fitch. He said Fitch would know what the paper meant. He said to trust no one between Billings and Helena, and then he had gripped her hand hard and said, children, especially not anyone who works for Aldrich. Children. 3 days later, her father was dead. The county records showed a fall from a horse. Lena had seen the horse. The horse was fine. She heard Cord's boots on the step outside and tucked the envelope back into the satchel. She was rebuckling the strap when he came in, bringing a draft of cold air and the smell of hay. He looked at her hands. He looked at the satchel. He looked at her face. "All right," he said. He sat back down. Children. He picked up his own cup of broth and drank from it without hurry, and then he waited. Lena thought about how much to tell him. She had gotten very good in the past 3 days at calculating risk. Children. At measuring the cost of one truth against the cost of a corresponding silence. It was exhausting work, the kind of work that ate through you from the inside. She said, "My name is Lena Aldridge." Children. "I was Lena Marsh before I married." Children. "My husband died 14 months ago, which his father decided meant that everything my own father had ever owned should now pass through the family as if I had never existed." She paused. "The papers I'm carrying prove that is not legal. They prove the land belongs to me outright. My father filed the deed before Denton Aldridge could interfere." She stopped again. Children. "And 3 men have been following me since Billings, because Denton Aldridge wants those papers before I reach the land agent in Helena." The fire ticked. The wind pressed against the sod roof. 3 men, children, Cord said. "At least 3, possibly 4. They were 2 days behind me when I lost my horse. In this weather, 2 days might as well be 6 hours. I know." He looked at her for a long moment. Children. Then he said something she had not expected. Children. He said, "What was your father's name?" She blinked. "Thomas Marsh." Cord set his cup down very carefully. Children. The motion was controlled in the way that sudden stillness is controlled, a man stopping himself from reacting to something. "Thomas Marsh," he said again quietly. Children. As if he needed to hear it twice to believe it. "Did you know him?" Cord's jaw shifted. He looked at the window. The frost had thickened on the glass while they sat there, children, reducing the view to a gray blur of shapes. Children. "I knew him," he said, 20 years ago. "Before I came out here, we were in the same survey crew out of Fort Benton." He paused. "He was the most honest man I ever worked beside." Children. "I've thought about that for 20 years, that some men just are what they appear to be, and he was one of them." Lena felt something in her chest give way. Not fall apart, just give way. Children. Like a door opening inward. She hadn't cried in 3 days. She didn't cry now. Children. But something released that had been held tight for a very long time. "He's gone," she said. "I gathered." He said it gently. "I'm sorry." They sat in the quiet of the fire for a moment. Then Cord stood up. He went to the corner of the room and moved aside a wooden crate to reveal a narrow shelf set into the wall between 2 logs, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Children. From the shelf he took a Remington rolling block rifle and a short-barreled pistol that had been wrapped in an oiled rag. "How far to Helena?" Lena asked. 30 miles north, children. Easy ride in good weather." He checked the action on the rifle. "Not easy in this. I have to reach Fitch before the end of the month. After that, children. Aldridge's lawyers file the counterclaim and the land goes to arbitration. Arbitration in this county means Aldridge wins. Children. He owns the judge." Cord looked up from the rifle. "I know Aldridge." Something in his voice made her wait. "He bought out 3 of my neighbors the year I arrived here. Children. Paid them below value and made it understood that refusing was unwise. He set the rifle down. 1 man refused. His barn burned that winter." He paused. "Nobody proved anything." Children. Lena looked at the pistol on the table. "He won't send men who leave tracks." "No," Cord agreed. "He won't. They were quiet for a moment, children. Then Cord looked at her with those plain, unremarkable brown eyes and said, "You can sleep in the loft tonight. In the morning we'll see what the weather looks like. You don't have to be involved in this." Tom Marsh's daughter shows up half frozen in my creek bed carrying evidence against Denton Aldridge. He wrapped the pistol back in its rag with methodical hands. "Children, I was involved before you told me a word." She slept the sleep of the completely spent, deep and immediate and without dreams, and woke before dawn to the sound of something she couldn't immediately place. Children, a creak. Wood settling. She lay still in the darkness of the loft, her hand already on the satchel, before she realized it was just the cabin contracting in the deep cold of the pre-dawn hour. Children. She lay there in the dark and listened to the silence. Then she heard the horse. Children. One horse picking its way carefully through frozen ground, too deliberate to be frank loose from the barn. She rolled to the edge of the loft and looked down. Cord was already standing at the window. Children. Fully dressed, the Remington in his hands. He hadn't lit a lamp. He was a shadow against a slightly less dark window. He held up one hand without looking back at her. "One." Children. She climbed silently down the loft ladder, the satchel slung across her body. Children. She took the pistol from the table where he'd left it and checked the cylinder the way her father had taught her to check things. By touch, by feel, not by sight. Cord moved to the door. Children. He pressed himself beside the frame and said loudly, with absolute calm, "Whoever's out there, I've got a rifle on this door, and I shoot by sound as well as sight." A long pause. Then a voice she knew. Low. Children. Careful. Scared. "Lena, it's Porter." She was at the door before Cord could stop her, pulling it open. Children. Her younger brother stood in the snow outside, his face cut above one cheekbone, his left arm held at an angle that told her it was broken or close to it. His horse stood behind him with its head hanging. Children. Blown out and exhausted. "They came to the house," Porter said. His voice was shaking. "The morning after you left Aldridge's men, 3 of them, I told them I didn't know where you'd gone." He swallowed. Children. "They didn't believe me." She pulled him inside. Children. Cord shut the door behind them and dropped the bar across it. Porter sat heavily at the table. Cord was already at the stove, wordless and efficient, the same way he'd handled everything. Children. Lena sat across from her brother and took his good hand in both of hers. "Did they follow you here?" "I don't think so. I went south first, then east, then cut north after dark." Porter's eyes went to Cord. Children. "Who is he?" "A man who knew our father." Porter looked at Cord again. Children. Cord looked back without performance. After a moment, Porter seemed to decide something and looked away, which Lena recognized as his particular way of extending trust. "There's something else," Porter said. He reached inside his coat with his good hand and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I found it in Father's desk after you left. In the false bottom. You remember the false bottom?" Children. "He showed me once and I forgot, and then I remembered after Aldridge's men left." He set the paper on the table. Lena unfolded it. It was a letter dated 4 years earlier, written in her father's hand, but addressed to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency's regional office in St. Paul. Children. In it, Thomas Marsh described in careful plain language, children, a specific instance of land fraud he had witnessed Denton Aldridge commit against a homesteading family named Pruitt, and stated that he himself was prepared to testify if called upon, children, because he had been present when the false deed was signed and he had seen the notary coerced. At the bottom of the letter, in different ink, someone had written, "Received and logged. Agent Whitmore, children. Case file 1886 MTO4. Lena read the letter twice, children. Then she looked up. "He already reported it," she said. "Father already filed a report. There's a case file." Porter nodded. "The Pinkertons have it. They've had it for 3 years. Cord, children. who had been standing at the stove with his back to them, turned around. Then the land agent in Helena isn't your only option. He came to the table and looked at the letter, children. If the Pinkertons have an open case file on Aldridge, the deed and this letter together close it. He looked at Lena, children. You don't have to outrun his lawyers. You have to get to the federal marshal's office in Helena. In Helena, he agreed, but the federal marshal, not the land agent. The land agent can be pressured, children. A federal case file cannot. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the barn, children. Lena thought she heard something, the distant, muffled suggestion of horses moving through snow. She looked at Cord. He'd heard it too. He moved to the window, children. Looked through the frost. He held up 3 fingers. Then he looked at her, and in the plain, unremarkable brown of his eyes, she saw something she had not expected to find there. Not fear, not calculation, children. Something quieter and more certain than either, the look of a man who has already decided. Get your brother onto Frank, Cord said. The draft horse is steady. He won't spook. He reached for his canvas coat, children. I know a north route that stays in the timber, children. They'll be watching the road. You'll come with us. It wasn't a question. He seemed to understand that and answered it like a statement. Yes, Cord. She said his name for the first time. It came out more plainly than she intended. They will hurt you if they catch you. These are not men who leave anything unresolved. I know what kind of men Denton Aldridge sends. He settled his ruined hat onto his head. Children. I've buried one of my neighbor's barns and done nothing about it for 4 years because it wasn't my fight. He looked at her steadily. It is now. They went out into the dark, children. What followed was 4 hours that Lena would spend years afterward trying to describe to people who had not been there and never quite managing it. The cold was a presence, children. Not a condition, a living thing that pressed against every unprotected surface and worked its way inward with patient cruelty, children. The timber route wound through stands of Douglas fir, so dense they had to ride single file, the horse's breath pluming in rhythmic clouds. Cord led without hesitation or consultation, children, following a path that Lena could not see, but that he seemed to carry inside him. She rode behind him, and Porter rode behind her, children. His broken arm strapped tight across his chest with a length of cord had tied before they left. He hadn't complained. He was, in this respect, very much their father's son, children. Twice they heard riders on the main road below them. Once, close enough that Cord raised his fist and they all stopped. 3 shapes motionless in the dark timber, children, barely breathing, while 3 horsemen moved through the gray pre-dawn below. One of the riders carried a lantern that swayed with each step of his horse, throwing an orange oval of light across the snow, children. Lena pressed her hand to the satchel and did not breathe. The riders passed, they rode on, children. Helena came into view in the gray-white of early morning, the mine scaffolding along the ridge above the town, just visible against the lightening sky, children. They came in off the timber slope onto the main road 3 miles north of town, and by the time they reached the first buildings, the sun was a flat white disk, sitting just above the eastern hills, children, giving light but no warmth. The federal marshal's office was on the corner of Main and Ewing, children. Cord knew where it was without asking, children, which surprised her until she remembered that he had lived in this territory for 20 years, and a man like him would know where the law offices were, the same way he would know where the water was, children. The marshal was a compact, careful-looking man named Griggs, who had the expression of someone accustomed to being told things he did not want to believe. Lena gave him the deed, the Pinkerton letter, children, the name of Agent Whitmore and the case file number, children. She gave him the names of the 3 men they'd seen on the road below the timber, which Cord supplied from memory in the calm way he supplied most things. Griggs read the letter 3 times. Children. He read the deed. He went into the back room and came out with a ledger, traced his finger down a column of case file numbers, and stopped. He looked up at Lena. Case 1886 MT04, he said. Open, children. Active, he set the ledger down. Aldridge has had federal attention for 2 years, children. We've been waiting for primary documentation. He looked at the deed, then back at her. You just provided it. What happened next was not dramatic. It was paperwork, children. It was depositions and wire telegrams, and a ride back to Cord's homestead by 2 federal deputies to collect the men who had been watching the road, children. It was Porter's arm set and splinted by a doctor on 2nd Street who charged 75 cents and complained about the cold, children. It was Lena sitting in a wooden chair in Griggs's outer office for 4 hours while things were processed, the satchel finally unbuckled and lying flat across her knees, empty. It was over, children. She didn't quite believe it for several hours. Cord waited with her the entire time. He sat on the bench along the wall with his hat in his hands, turning it in his fingers, children. And he didn't try to fill the silence with anything. He had the gift, rare in anyone, of understanding that some silences need to sit, children. When the deputy finally came out and told her that a warrant had been issued for Denton Aldridge's arrest, and that the land deed had been officially recorded in her name in the territorial records, children, she sat for a moment without moving. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. She looked at the floor. Miss Aldridge, the deputy said uncertainly. Marsh, she said quietly. I think I'll go back to Marsh, children. Cord was watching her when she looked up. He had put his hat back on, children. He looked at her with those plain brown eyes that she had stopped thinking of as unremarkable. Somewhere in the dark of the timber root. Your father would have been straight-spined about this, he said, children. She laughed. Just once, a single short sound, more relief than humor. He would have been insufferable, she said. He would have said, I told you so for a year. Cord smiled, children. It changed his face completely, not into something softer exactly, but into something more complete, children. Like a wall with a window cut into it, they walked out together into the cold, morning street. Porter was across the road with the doctor, laughing at something, his splinted arm held up like a flag, children. Frank the draft horse stood at the rail where they'd left him, completely indifferent to the events of the morning. You lost your horse, Cord said. I did, and your coat is still soaked through, children. She looked down at the canvas coat. She'd forgotten about it entirely, children. It's had a difficult few days. There's a dry goods store on 2nd. He looked at her sideways. You don't have to ride straight back. No, she agreed. I don't. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They had spent hours in the dark together not saying the things that didn't need saying, and this was simply more of the same, children. She fell into step beside him on the board sidewalk, and for the first time in 3 days, she could feel her feet properly, every step solid and certain beneath her, carrying her forward into a morning that, against every expectation, had turned out to be bright.